see these sound bites come in and Democrats weigh in, I thought it would be a good idea to call up 1-800 Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, because he'll be in the middle of all this legislation. Senator, what do you think about what could be changing in Washington?
Well, Brian, the Senate Democrats are going to propose a bill next week, as you mentioned, that tries to federalize our elections, that takes away almost all authority from our state governments. Republicans will oppose that bill. We don't have an alternative because we don't think we should federalize our elections. We think our states do a pretty good job of running our election system. Now, I know that Joe Manchin has proposed some alternatives to it, but I think the core of the bill is still extremely unpopular. You mentioned just one example, public financing for campaigns. That would send hundreds of millions of your taxpayer dollars to politicians to run negative ads against their opponents. I don't think many American people are clamoring for the Democrats in Washington to pass that law.
He's also against still, as you agree with this, no excuse absentee balloting. He wants to ban partisan gerrymandering. He'd be into that. He's not for public financing of elections. You're happy about that. He wants voter ID, which is good, but he'll say, I'll substitute utility bills. I think Republicans, even in Georgia, are for that. He also proposed making Election Day a public holiday, mandating 15 consecutive days of early voting, and allowing for automatic registration through the DMV. Is any of this negotiable with Tom Cotton?
Brian, what I would say is that some of those proposals I could support if Joe Manchin and I and the rest of my colleagues were state legislators in Arkansas or West Virginia. But there's really no basis for Washington to be dictating those practices to the states. Some states have longer early voting periods. Some states have no early voting periods. Some states have absent or no excuse absentee. Some states have excuse only. I think that's fine. It's actually a resilient part of our democracy that each state and really each county runs its own election systems.
Right.
So although I don't agree with Joe Manchin on this specific bill, I am pleased that Joe has once again reiterated to his more radical colleagues that he is going to respect the rules and the customs of the Senate. If the Democrats wanted to enact their agenda, rather than changing the Senate rules, maybe they should change their agenda and focus on bills that are a little more popular.
So there's this compromise infrastructure bill that Joe Manchin kind of headed this up. He's got 11 Republicans on board. It's going to be about $560 billion extra spending, repurposing past spending, get you close to $1 trillion. Senator Tom Cotton, have you seen this? Could you see yourself signing on to this?
I don't think they have a legislative text yet, Brian, but I commend all these senators for working on it. There are some provisions in there I very strongly support. We need more infrastructure spending, especially on maintenance and operations around the country. You know, in Arkansas and Tennessee, we have a real challenge because the bridge on Interstate 40 across the Mississippi River is currently closed because of deficiencies in that bridge. So that's the kind of thing I think Congress should focus on, that most Americans would like us to pass into law without raising taxes or borrowing the money from China. What they don't want is to see an infrastructure bill that is focused on things like giving tax breaks to rich people to buy electric cars.
Right. I understand how you feel on that. Real quick, do you feel as though Republicans should come to the table? Because Manchin's taking a lot of heat from the left. If Republicans just stiff arm him and give him the Heisman, he'll really have nowhere else to go but left.
Yeah, well, the story of this Congress so far, Brian, is that we have worked in a pretty cooperative fashion to pass many pieces of legislation. For example, a bill that would crack down on anti-Asian American hate crimes. There are going to be some places where we disagree. Obviously, Republicans didn't support $2 trillion of needless spending back in March.
Gotcha.
But something like an infrastructure bill where people in West Virginia and Arkansas and across the country can agree, I think it would be good for us to find a bipartisan compromise.
Senator, it was 15 months ago when you were on our show and then jumped on radio with me, and you said, look at this Wuhan lab when this pandemic began to hit our shores, and we realized it was worse than we even could have imagined. One person always pushing back on that, it seemed, was Anthony Fauci. Here's what he said the other day.
If you go back then, even though you lean towards feeling that this is more likely a natural occurrence, we always felt that you've got to keep an open mind. All of us. We didn't get up and start announcing it, but we've always said keep an open mind and continue to look. So I think it's a bit of a distortion to say that we deliberately suppress that.
Did he have an open mind in your view?
No, the only one distorting the facts here are Tony Fauci. He said that there was an infinitesimally small chance that it would come from the lab. He circled the wagons. He protected his fellow activists in white lab coats. Some cases he protected himself and his own agency because of the funding they had given to that lab in Wuhan. Look, you don't have to have some fancy degree or be a scientist to simply look at the facts here. This novel coronavirus didn't emerge from a remote mountain village next to a cave full of bats. It emerged from a city larger than New York, right down the street from the laboratory where they research novel coronaviruses, a lab that is literally run by a woman nicknamed the Bat Lady.
Senator, lastly, real quick, there's a letter written last week of scientists saying they need to find out more answers when it comes to this lab. And one of these scientists on the record saying, I came to this conclusion early, but I didn't want to come out with it because I didn't want to agree with Donald Trump. What's your reaction to that?
It's not surprising that these so-called experts are really little more than political activists in white lab coats. That's the common thing you see in Washington, D.C. and among elite liberal institutions, is that these liberals use their credentials, they use their position to try to present themselves as presenting nonpartisan or neutral information, when in reality, they're simply pushing Democratic Party talking points.
I know Thursday's a big night out for you, so I'm going to let you go out now. You can go party. You led off our show and got us off to a strong start, Senator. I really owe you one.
Thanks, Brian. Always good to be on with you.
All right. Meanwhile.